All right, let's talk about International Conference for Harmonization, their Q7 guidelines. When they first came out, it was Q7A because there was going to be a whole series of these, and because B was going to be for finished products and C was going to be for excipients. That never happened. So they dropped the A and it's now just ICH Q7. Which GMPs apply in the United States today? That depends. If you're making a non-sterile API, that's Q7. Now it's a guideline, but FDA follows it. If you're making a sterile API, then it's 21 CFR 211, because legally a sterile API is a drug product. So if you're going to audit a sterile API company overseas, you've got to use drug GMPs, not API GMPs. Okay? In principle, they're the same, but 21 CFR 211 has certain other extra goodies. In the rest of the world, both sterile and non-sterile, it's ICH Q7. All right? Very simple. Now, there are several principles of quality assurance that are built into general GMPs and ICH GMPs, and I just want to cover that for a minute. First principle is that safety, quality, and effectiveness has to be designed and built into the product. You're all familiar with this, right? If you read GMPs, they keep talking about quality, safety, purity, efficacy. It has to be designed and built into the product. Does anybody remember a product called thalidomide? If you're European or Australian, you sure remember it, because mothers who were pregnant, or soon-to-be mothers who were pregnant, would get morning sickness, very debilitating. They would take 2 tablets of thalidomide, 1 a day for 2 days. Morning sickness goes away. The only problem was that 6 months later, babies were born without arms and legs. Very teratogenic effects. The product never got to be sold in America because the lady who was doing the review, she was very slow, very particular, and she took so long to do the review, about 7 years, that by the time she had to come to a conclusion, the European results were coming out and she couldn't approve it. She got a congressional medal for that, either for efficiency, thoroughness, or as some people say, slowness. She is still a reviewer today. She is 92 years old and she works full-time for FDA. Why did thalidomide get approved with all these teratogenic effects? Didn't the German company who invented it in 1959 test it on patients? Well, yes, they did. Didn't they test it on women? Well, yes, they did. Didn't they test it on pregnant women? Well, yes, they did. So how come they didn't see any side effects? And they didn't. And the answer is because nobody realized there was 2 isometric forms of thalidomide, a D form and an L form. And the stuff that was made in the lab for the testing was the L form, which is safe as houses. But when they commercially scaled up, they allowed the impurity to get in, which they either didn't test for, or didn't care about, or they just didn't know about, and suddenly you get all these health defects. So quality has to start at R&D. Number 2, quality cannot be inspected or tested into the product. You've all heard that phrase. Let me ask you the question, how many of you test your APIs for traces of cyanide? How many of you test APIs that you buy for traces of cyanide? Or asbestos? Or anything else? And the answer is you don't. And why don't you? Because you could test for 1,000 things. And where do you stop? The answer is you don't test because you don't expect it. You only test typically what the pharmacopoeia says for. I have had clients who've bought API which was contaminated with cyanide, which have bought API that was contaminated with asbestos, and you never know about the potential unless you go visit the API site personally. FDA has said publicly they do not accept paper audits, where you send a questionnaire by mail. To them, that is a waste of time. I saw one recently where one of the first questions was, are you a financially solvent company? Now, if you're sending that out to a prospective seller of APIs, who's going to say, no, we're about to go bankrupt? Nobody. So these paper audits are a waste of time. You need to go visit the site to see what's going on, to see if the production line next to you has a cyanide process and there could be traces of contamination, and they're mixing up their buckets and they're not cleaning them properly. And every step of the process has to be controlled to maximize the probability that the finished product meets all of its design specifications. That's easy to say and hard to understand. So let me give you an example. What storage temperature do you store APIs? I was doing an inspection in India, and I'm going around and it is hot as all hell. I mean, India can get to be very hot, as some of you know. And this is June, about a month before the monsoon, and I am sweating my guts out. And I said, okay, let me see where you store the finished API that we are about to buy from you. And they take me to this shed outside somewhere. A shed has a roof but no walls on the side. And they said, here's your API, there it is. And it says, caution, keep away from fire, store in a cool, dry, and well-closed place. Best used within 18 months of production. And you can see the production date here right now, the manufacturing date. You see that? You all can see it, right? Well, when the sun comes down up in the morning or down in the evening, it doesn't come straight on top and is protected by the shed roof. The sun comes in on the side, and the ink has faded, so nobody will know. And I'm sweating my guts. I said, it's awfully hot in here. I said, really, this is terrible. They said, this is not hot. I said, it's not. And they said, no, come back in a month and a half, the week before the monsoon when it's 50 degrees. Because everybody in India prays for the monsoon because then the rains come, people dance in the streets because it gets colder, right? Lovely. So I said, well, how hot is it? And they said, well, we'll go find out. We will get a thermometer. And you can see it was 33.7. I thought it was more, but it was 33.7, which prompted me to ask the question, how do you define cool? Because it says store in a cool place. And they said, one person said, well, this is cool. And I said, you're joking. And another guy said, well, 30 is cool. And we had bizarre numbers. I said, you know what the American definition of cool is? And they said, obviously not. And I said, well, if you look in the pharmacopoeia, it's 8 to 15. So what have they done by the way they're storing their API? They've created an accelerated stability study. It's a degradation study, actually. So when you actually do buy this stuff, if you can read the date, it's not going to last that long. All right? And by the way, dry is less than 40%, so we were up at 61%. So in all ways you're thinking of, unless you go to the facility and see what's going on, you could end up buying garbage product. So just be aware of that. So you need a budget for travel. Now, a warning to you. FDA is pushing API GMPs back from the API itself and is now actively inspecting companies that make the key intermediate of the API. If the key intermediate is the major part of the molecule of the API, don't be shocked or surprised when FDA says, we want the details of that in your drug master file and in your NDA or ANDA, and we will going to go inspect them. And many of my clients in America who buy from China are suddenly shocked when FDA goes to the intermediate manufacturer who has not the faintest concept what a GMP is. Never heard of it. So please, that's the biggest push now. That push started by the Canadians. They just seem to be thinking about this more than we do. I added that this morning. Sorry you don't have it in your notes, but please write this down.